Emotional reunion. CEO's world shatters when he faces the consequences of leaving his family for 10 years. My beautiful story reader, before we begin, I have a small request. I know your time is precious, so I'll keep this brief, just 30 seconds. Today marks the beginning of a brand new year, bringing hope, dreams, and the chance to grow together. If you subscribe to this channel today, you won't just be joining a community, you'll be joining a family that shares stories, emotions, and memories. I'd love to know your name and city, so drop a comment below. Let me know if my work resonates with you or if there's anything I can do better. Your feedback means the world to me. Now let's dive into today's story. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. September 15th, 2004, dawned like any other autumn morning in Seattle, but it would become the day that redefined Adais Herbert's entire existence. The sun hadn't yet breached the horizon when she stirred in their king-sized bed, her hand instinctively reaching for Melvin's warmth beside her. The sheets were still carrying his lingering scent, an expensive cologne she'd gifted him on their 5th anniversary just 2 months ago. The previous evening replayed in her mind like a beautiful dream as she padded across their marble floors, wrapping herself in a cashmere robe. Another gift from Melvin. He'd been uncharacteristically attentive, almost tender, in a way she hadn't seen since their early dating days. He'd surprised her by coming home early from ChadTech, the software company they'd built together from the ground up, carrying her favorite bottle of Chateau Margaux 1996 and a bouquet of blue orchids, the same flowers he'd given her on their first date. "Let's watch the sunset together," he'd suggested, taking her hand and leading her to their wraparound balcony on the 45th floor of Seattle's most prestigious residential tower. The way he'd held her as they watched the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, his fingers intertwined with hers, felt like a scene from their courtship days. If only she'd known it was a goodbye, not a romantic gesture. Adaize smiled at the memory as she began her morning routine, fighting off a wave of nausea that she'd been experiencing lately. The penthouse kitchen gleamed in the pre-dawn light, all sleek surfaces and high-end appliances. She'd insisted on designing it herself when they bought the place 3 years ago, arguing that even though they could afford a private chef, she wanted to keep cooking the Nigerian dishes her mother had taught her. The kitchen had become her sanctuary, a place where she could honor her heritage while building their future together. She pulled out the ingredients for Melvin's favorite breakfast, vanilla bean French toast with caramelized bananas, a dish she'd perfected over their years together. The kitchen filled with warm, sweet aromas as she worked, humming softly to herself. She'd been meaning to tell him about her suspicions, about the possibility that their family of 2 might soon grow. But something had held her back, an inexplicable instinct telling her to wait for the right moment. The first hint that something was wrong came when she noticed his office door was slightly ajar. Melvin was religious about keeping it closed, a habit from my coding days, he'd always say with a laugh. "Can't risk anyone seeing the mess inside my head while I'm working through a problem." The sight of the open door sent an inexplicable chill down her spine. Setting down the whisk, she walked toward his office, her bare feet silent against the heated floors. The morning light was starting to stream through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. His office looked different somehow. It took her a moment to realize what was wrong. The little touches that made it uniquely Melvin's space were missing. The framed photo of their wedding day that always sat on his desk was gone. The vintage Star Wars posters she'd tracked down for his 30th birthday had been carefully removed from the walls, leaving behind only faint rectangular outlines where they'd protected the paint from fading. Her heart began to race as she turned in a slow circle, cataloguing the absences. His collection of rare first-edition science fiction novels gone from the built-in shelves. The custom mechanical keyboard she'd had made for him last Christmas, with keys in their company colors. missing from its place of honor beside his monitors. She rushed to their bedroom, her bare feet slapping against the floor now, all pretense of calm abandoned. The walk-in closet told its own story of methodical removal, his side stripped bare of the custom suits and casual wear she'd helped him select over the years. Even his favorite ratty MIT hoodie, the one she'd repeatedly threatened to throw out, was gone. When she finally noticed the cream-colored envelope on his pillow, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open it. The paper inside was thick, expensive, the same stationery they used for corporate communications at ChadTech. Melvin's precise handwriting, familiar from countless love notes and anniversary cards, now delivered a very different message. Adese, I've outgrown us. Don't try to find me. The divorce papers will arrive soon. Melvin. The coldness of those words made her physically ill. Or perhaps that was the morning sickness she'd been trying to ignore. She sank to her knees beside their bed, still clutching the note, as the first rays of sunrise finally broke through the window. The light caught her wedding ring, sending sparkles dancing across the walls like mocking reminders of happier times. The smell of burning sugar finally penetrated her shock, the caramelized bananas still on the stove. She ran to the kitchen, bare feet slipping on the polished floors, but it was too late. Thick black smoke rose from the ruined breakfast, setting off the fire alarms. The harsh beeping felt appropriate somehow, an external expression of the alarm bells ringing in her own head. As she opened windows to clear the smoke, movement in the private parking garage below caught her eye. A sleek black Tesla, Melvin's car, was pulling out, but he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat, she caught a glimpse of long, dark hair and a feminine profile she recognized. Victoria Zhang, the ambitious executive from their biggest competitor who'd been trying to poach Melvin for months. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The late nights at the office, the mysterious business trips, the way he'd been slowly pulling away emotionally while maintaining a perfect facade. The unusually tender evening they'd shared last night, it hadn't been a rekindling, it had been a farewell performance. Her tech-savvy instincts kicked in through the shock. She grabbed her laptop, trying to log into their joint accounts, but access denied messages flashed across the screen. She tried their corporate systems next, same result. In the space of a few hours, he'd managed to lock her out of everything they'd built together. The penthouse that had felt like a sanctuary now seemed to mock her with its perfection. Every corner held memories. The spot where they'd slow danced after closing their first major contract, the couch where they'd brainstormed the company name, the kitchen island where they'd celebrated countless milestones with champagne and takeout when they were too tired to cook. Her phone buzzed. A text from Zara, her sister. Just saw the email. What the hell is going on? I'm coming over. Email? She checked her phone, and there it was, sent to all ChadTech employees at 6 a.m. Effective immediately, Melvin Chad will be stepping down as CEO to pursue other opportunities. All inquiries should be directed to the board of directors. The room started to spin. She made it to the bathroom just in time, emptying her stomach of nothing but bile since she hadn't eaten yet. As she rinsed her mouth, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Successful tech entrepreneur, co-founder of a multi-million-dollar company, and now... What? Abandoned wife? Soon-to-be divorcee? Possibly pregnant woman left alone with nothing but a cruel note and the ashes of her dreams? The sound that escaped her throat was primal, a keening wail that echoed off the marble surfaces of their luxury prison. She sank to the floor, curling into herself as sobs racked her body. The morning sun continued its inexorable rise, warming the space around her, oblivious to the way her world had just shattered into a million glittering pieces. But even in her darkest moment, something inside Adese Herbert refused to break completely. As her tears slowed, she placed a hand over her still flat stomach, where she suspected new life was growing. The nausea, the fatigue, the emotional swings. She'd been planning to confirm her suspicions this week. Now, that potential life represented something different. Not the culmination of their love story, but a new beginning she'd have to face alone. She pulled herself up off the bathroom floor, caught her reflection again in the mirror, and straightened her spine. The woman staring back at her was a warrior, a descendant of strong Nigerian women who had faced worse and survived. She might be alone, but she wasn't broken. The sound of the front door opening broke through her thoughts. Zara, using her emergency key. Her sister's voice called out, tight with concern. "Ada, where are you?" Adaeze took one final look in the mirror, wiped her tears, and lifted her chin. The day Melvin Chad left might have started like any other, but it would end as the first day of her new life. She didn't know yet about the 3 miracles growing inside her, or the empire she would build from the ashes of his betrayal, or the sweet revenge that time would deliver. But as she walked out to meet her sister, something in her stance had already changed. Steel replacing softness, determination drowning out despair. The French toast continued to smoke on the stove, filling the penthouse with the acrid smell of burned dreams. But beneath that bitter scent, if you looked closely, you might have detected something else, the faint, sweet aroma of revenge just beginning to simmer. Chapter 2. The Aftermath. The divorce papers arrived precisely 72 hours after Melvin's departure, delivered by a courier who seemed almost apologetic as he handed over the thick manila envelope. Adaeze sat at her kitchen island, the morning light catching the diamond of her wedding ring, the same ring she'd now twisted anxiously 1,000 times since finding his note. Zara, who hadn't left her sister's side for 3 days, immediately reached for her phone. "Don't even think about opening that without legal representation," Zara commanded, her voice carrying the authority of 12 years as a high-powered attorney at Morrison and Sterling. She was already dialing before Adaeze could protest. "James, it's Zara Herbert. Remember that favor you owe me from the Martinez case? I'm calling it in. My sister needs you. Yes, it's about Chad Tech." Adaeze watched her sister pace their balcony, the same spot where just days ago she'd stood in Melvin's arms, completely unaware that it was all a carefully orchestrated farewell. The memory made her stomach lurch, or maybe that was the morning sickness again. She'd been avoiding taking the pregnancy test hidden in her bathroom drawer, as if confirming her suspicions would somehow make this nightmare even more real. James Patterson arrived within the hour, his reputation for being Seattle's most feared divorce attorney preceding him. He was younger than Adaeze expected, barely 40, but his eyes held the shrewd calculation of someone who had seen every dirty trick in the book. He wore his suit like armor, and his briefcase, which probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, landed on the kitchen island with a decisive thunk. "Don't open those papers yet," he instructed, pulling out his laptop. "First, we need to talk about what happened. Every detail matters. Start from the beginning." For the next 3 hours, Adaeze recounted everything while James took meticulous notes. She described the previous months, the late nights, the mysterious business trips, the subtle emotional withdrawal. She detailed their last evening together, now recognizing it as the performance it was. When she mentioned Victoria Jang, James's eyebrows shot up. "Victoria Jang from Rival Tech," he interrupted, fingers flying across his keyboard. "This is excellent." "Excellent?" Adaze's voice cracked. "My husband left me for—" "Your husband left you for a senior executive at your biggest competitor, right after several mysterious business trips," James corrected, a predatory smile playing at his lips. "Do you know what that suggests? Industrial espionage, corporate secrets, the kind of thing that makes judges very, very interested." Zara, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. "And the board of directors? They received no warning about his departure?" "None," Adaze confirmed. Just that email at 6 a.m. saying he was stepping down effective immediately. Even better, James nodded. Now, let's see what kind of mess he's trying to hand you. He reached for the manila envelope, but Adaze suddenly bolted from her chair, making it to the bathroom just in time to be violently ill. When she returned, pale but composed, both lawyers were watching her intently. Zara's expression shifted from professional to personal in an instant. "Ada," she said softly, "when was the last time you had your period?" The question hung in the air like crystal about to shatter. Adaze sank back into her chair, hands trembling. "I'm late. About 6 weeks. I've been meaning to take a test, but with everything happening with the company." James's expression turned calculating again. "Take the test now." "What? No, we need to focus on take it now," he repeated firmly. "If you're pregnant, it changes everything about our strategy. Zara, go buy 3 tests from different brands. We need to be certain." The next 30 minutes were some of the longest of Adaze's life. 3 tests lined up on her marble bathroom counter, all displaying the same unmistakable result: pregnant. The room spun as she stared at them, her mind racing through calculations. 6 weeks. It must have happened during their anniversary weekend at the vineyard, when Melvin had seemed briefly like his old self again. When she emerged from the bathroom, test in hand, she found not just James and Zara waiting, but also Marcus Chen, Chadtech's chief financial officer and her longtime friend. He looked grave. "I came as soon as I could get away from the emergency board meeting," he explained, his normally impeccable suit showing signs of a stressful day. "Ada, it's worse than we thought. He's been planning this for months. The financial trails, they're sophisticated. He's moved millions through a series of shell companies. I've got our forensic accountants working on it, but—" "How much?" James interrupted sharply. Marcus ran a hand through his greying hair. "Preliminary estimate, nearly 40 million, and he's locked Ada out of all the primary systems. The board is in chaos. Half of them are calling for immediate legal action. The other half are worried about stock prices if this becomes public." Adaze felt the room tilt again, but this time Zara was there, guiding her to the couch. The same couch where she and Melvin had spent countless evenings planning their future, drafting business strategies on laptops while sharing takeout. Now, she was living in what felt like a museum of betrayal, every corner holding memories that had been poisoned. James was already on his phone, barking orders to his team. "I want emergency injunctions filed in every jurisdiction where Chadtech operates. Freeze everything, and get me Judge Martinez, her private number, not Chambers. This is exactly the kind of corporate malfeasance she loves to sink her teeth into." The next few hours passed in a blur of legal terminology and rapid-fire decisions. James and his team worked from her dining room table, surrounded by laptops and legal documents. Zara coordinated with Morrison and Sterling's corporate division, building a parallel case to protect Adaze's business interests. Marcus huddled in Melvin's former office with the forensic accountants, unraveling the complex web of financial deception. As evening fell, Adaze stood at the windows, watching the Seattle skyline light up. One hand rested protectively over her stomach, while the other held her phone, displaying the latest email from Melvin's lawyers. They wanted a quick, quiet settlement, no messy publicity, no drawn-out legal battles, just a clean break and a generous settlement package. "They're scared," James observed, coming to stand beside her. "They know we have enough to bury him. The corporate espionage angle alone could trigger federal investigations. They want this wrapped up before anyone starts asking too many questions." "What do you recommend?" Adaze asked, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside her. "We go for the jugular," he replied without hesitation. File everything publicly. Corporate malfeasance, breach of fiduciary duty, emotional distress, criminal conspiracy with Zhang and rival tech. Let the media feast on it. When the stock price tanks and the shareholders start screaming, he'll realize he's not as clever as he thinks he is. And the pregnancy? James's expression softened slightly, the first crack in his shark-like demeanor. We keep that quiet for now. It's our ace in the hole. The moment he finds out, he'll try to spin this as a family matter rather than a corporate crime. Let him dig himself deeper first. Zara appeared with a cup of ginger tea, pressing it into Adai's hands. You need to rest, she insisted. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. The weight of that truth settled over Adai like a blanket. She wasn't just a betrayed wife or a businesswoman under siege. She was a mother-to-be, responsible for a new life growing inside her. The thought stirred something primal in her chest, a fierce determination that burned away some of the fog of betrayal. No, she said, straightening her spine. I need to fight, not just for the baby, but for every woman who's ever been underestimated, betrayed, or pushed aside. Melvin thinks he's written the end of our story, but he's wrong. This is just the beginning. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the steel in her voice. Marcus was the first to respond, pulling out his phone. I'll call an emergency shareholders meeting. Half the board already wants blood. Let's give them a reason to back you completely. James nodded approvingly. I'll have the initial filings ready by morning. Judge Martinez owns Chad Tech stock. She'll have to recuse herself, but not before the media gets wind of a respected federal judge divesting due to corporate criminal allegations. Zara squeezed her sister's hand. I'll stay with you tonight. We need to start planning for the long game, not just the legal battle, but everything else. Doctors' appointments, prenatal care, restructuring the company. As her support team sprang into action around her, Adai felt something shift inside her. The raw wound of betrayal was still there, but it was being overshadowed by something stronger: purpose. Melvin had tried to write her out of their shared story, but he'd forgotten something crucial. She had always been the better storyteller. She turned back to the window, watching her reflection overlay the city lights. The woman staring back at her wasn't broken. She was transforming. In her mind, she could already see the headlines that would start appearing tomorrow. Chad Tech CEOs, sudden departure triggers, federal investigation, corporate espionage allegations, rock tech industry, power couples split threatens tech empire. But what none of those headlines would reveal, yet, was the quiet miracle taking place beneath her heart. A new life, unplanned but already fiercely loved, growing stronger even as its father orchestrated his grand betrayal from halfway around the world. Someday, Adai promised silently, this child would know the full story. How its mother rose from the ashes of betrayal to build something stronger, better, and more lasting than anything Melvin Chad could imagine. The sun had fully set now, leaving the penthouse illuminated by the soft glow of Seattle's nighttime skyline. The divorce papers still sat unopened on the kitchen island, but they no longer held the power to devastate. They were just one more weapon in what was about to become the tech industry's most fascinating war. A war Melvin had started, but Adai intended to finish. She picked up her phone and began composing an email to Chad Tech's employees. They deserved to hear from her directly, to know that while their co-founder had abandoned ship, their true captain remained at the helm. With each word she typed, she felt her strength growing, her purpose crystallizing. Melvin had taught her many things during their years together, but he'd forgotten the most important lesson: never underestimate a woman with everything to prove and nothing left to lose. The night stretched ahead, full of legal strategies and corporate maneuvers, but Adai's Herbert was ready. She had a company to save, a reputation to defend, and a future to protect, not just for herself now, but for the tiny spark of life that represented both her greatest vulnerability and her strongest motivation. The game had changed, but she was just getting started. Chapter 3. Triple Surprise. The waiting room of Seattle's most prestigious obstetrics clinic felt more like a luxury spa than a medical facility. Adais sat in a plush chair, absently flipping through a magazine, while Zara typed rapidly on her phone, coordinating the legal team's latest moves. 2 weeks had passed since Melvin's departure, and the media storm was reaching Category 5 intensity. Reuters is running another story about the SEC investigation, Zara reported without looking up. James says it's perfect timing. Keeps the focus on corporate misconduct rather than personal drama. Adais barely heard her. Her attention was fixed on the subtle changes in her body, the increasing frequency of morning sickness, the tender breasts, the bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. She'd finally scheduled this appointment, unable to delay facing reality any longer. Mrs. Chad, a nurse called, then immediately corrected herself at Adais's flinch. Ms. Herbert. The examination room was warm and welcoming, decorated in soothing earth tones. Dr. Maya Patel, one of Seattle's top high-risk pregnancy specialists, entered with a warm smile that couldn't quite hide her recognition. Everyone in the tech world knew Adais's story by now. "I've reviewed your preliminary blood work," Dr. Patel began, pulling up charts on her tablet. "Your HCG levels are interesting. Let's do an ultrasound and see what we're dealing with." The gel was cold on Adais's stomach despite the nurse's warning. As Dr. Patel moved the ultrasound wand, the room filled with a rapid whooshing sound. The doctor's eyebrows rose and she adjusted something on the machine. "Well," she said slowly, "this explains the HCG levels." She turned the screen so Adais and Zara could see it better. "Ms. Herbert, do you see these 3 distinct shapes? Each one is a separate gestational sac. You're carrying triplets." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Zara's phone clattered to the floor, forgotten. Adais stared at the screen, at the 3 tiny miracles floating in their private universes, and felt tears sliding down her temples into her hair. "3?" she whispered. Dr. Patel nodded, pointing to each sac in turn. "All measuring perfectly for 6 weeks, strong heartbeats. From what I can see, they appear to be trichorionic triplets, meaning each baby has its own placenta. This is actually the best possible scenario for a triplet pregnancy." The next hour passed in a blur of medical terminology and care instructions. High-risk pregnancy, weekly monitoring, possible bed rest in later trimesters, nutritional requirements, stress management. At this, both Dr. Patel and Zara gave her meaningful looks. "The corporate war you're waging," Dr. Patel said frankly, "it needs to take a back seat. These babies are now your priority. Triple the hormones means triple the stress impact. I want you to step back from anything non-essential." Zara was already making calls before they left the clinic, reorganizing legal strategies and corporate responsibilities. But Adaisi barely registered the conversation. Her mind was spinning with implications, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, where 3 new lives were growing. The drive home was silent until Zara finally spoke. "3 babies," she said softly. 3 little warriors. Mom would say it's a blessing from the ancestors." Adais thought of their mother, gone 5 years now, and how she'd always said that children were God's way of showing that life goes on. "She'd also say Melvin's karma is working overtime," she replied with a watery laugh. Back at the penthouse, they found Marcus, waiting with takeout and news. "The board is fully behind you," he reported. "Melvin's latest financial trails have been uncovered. He's definitely been feeding information to rival tech. The SEC is involved now, and there's talk of criminal charges." But for the first time since Melvin's betrayal, Adai's wasn't focused on revenge or corporate warfare. She was thinking about the nursery that would need to be created, wondering if 2 boys and a girl grew inside her, or 3 boys, or 3 girls. She thought about names, about tiny clothes in triplicate, about how she would manage motherhood alone. No, not alone. Looking at Zara organizing delivery of prenatal vitamins, at Marcus pushing aside legal documents to make room for dinner, at the stream of supportive messages from Chad Tech employees, she realized she had a village ready to help raise these children. The next few days brought a flurry of activity. Dr. Patel had assembled a specialized medical team, including Dr. Sarah Cho, a maternal-fetal medicine specialist, and Dr. David Martinez, Seattle's top multiple birth expert. Each appointment revealed more details: 3 distinct heartbeats, 3 perfect spinal columns, 3 sets of tiny limbs beginning to form. Zara had practically moved in, converting Melvin's home office into her temporary workspace. The room that had once been dominated by his presence was now filled with both legal documents and baby-related research. The transformation felt symbolic somehow, replacing memories of betrayal with plans for the future. The media continued to speculate about Melvin's whereabouts and the growing corporate scandal, but Adai's found her focus shifting. Yes, she would fight to protect her company and her reputation, but now she had something far more precious to safeguard. One evening, about a week after the ultrasound revelation, Adai sat on her balcony, watching the sunset. The first time she'd done so since that last night with Melvin. The sky painted itself in shades of pink and gold, but instead of feeling pain at the memory, she felt something new: gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to her unborn children, "for giving me a reason to be stronger than my heartbreak." Inside, she could hear Zara arguing with James about legal strategy, Marcus coordinating with the forensic accountants, and her personal assistant organizing the delivery of pregnancy books and vitamins. The penthouse, that had felt like a mausoleum of dead dreams, was coming alive again, filling with plans for the future rather than echoes of the past. That night, she dreamed of 3 little faces: a girl with her mother's artistic soul, and 2 boys carrying their parents' drive for innovation. In her dream, they were running through a garden, their laughter healing all the broken places in her heart. She woke with tears on her face, but for the first time, they weren't tears of sorrow. The next morning brought another round of meetings with her medical team. Dr. Patel showed her new ultrasound images, pointing out tiny details. The way one baby seemed to be reaching out, another doing what looked like somersaults, the third curled peacefully in its private universe. "They're fighters," Dr. Martinez observed, studying the monitors. "Strong heartbeats, good positioning, but you need to understand this pregnancy will be challenging. No more 18-hour workdays, no more skipping meals. These little ones need you at your best." Adai nodded, already feeling the protective instincts growing stronger. She had always been a planner, a strategist, someone who mapped out every possibility. Now she found herself planning for a future she never expected, researching triple strollers, reading about managing multiple newborns, learning about the unique challenges and joys of raising triplets. That evening, she asked Marcus to help her with a different kind of project: converting Melvin's private study into a nursery planning room. They took down the remaining traces of his presence and replaced them with paint swatches, furniture catalogues, and lists of baby names. 3 of everything, Marcus mused, helping her pin up design ideas. "It's like the universe is making sure you'll never be alone again." The thought struck her with unexpected force. Yes, Melvin had abandoned her, thinking he was leaving her with nothing. Instead, he had unknowingly given her everything. 3 new reasons: to live, to fight, to succeed. As weeks turned into months, Adaisy's body began to change, her small frame adapting to carry 3 precious lives. The media speculation about her stress-related absence from public appearances grew, but she remained focused on what mattered most. Let them wonder, let them speculate. She had a secret that made all their gossip meaningless. The corporate investigation continued, with James and his team building an ironclad case against Melvin and Victoria Zhang. But Adaisy now viewed it differently, not as revenge, but as protection for her children's future. Every legal motion, every financial trace, every piece of evidence was another brick in the foundation she was building for 3 tiny lives who would need her strength. Zara found her one night in what would become the nursery, surrounded by color samples and baby furniture catalogs. "You're glowing," she observed, sitting beside her sister. "Despite everything, or maybe because of it, you're glowing." Adaise smiled, running her hands over her slightly rounding stomach. "I keep thinking about Mom's favorite saying, when God closes a door, sometimes he opens 3 windows. She laughed softly. "I just didn't expect it to be so literal." The room that would house her 3 miracles was beginning to take shape in her mind. Soft colors, gentle light, space for 3 cribs arranged so each baby could see its siblings. She would fill it with love, with stories, with dreams big enough for 3 hearts to grow into. "Melvin thought he was writing the end of our story," she murmured. "But he was really just setting up the beginning of a much better one." Outside, Seattle's lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth. And somewhere in that glittering cityscape, 3 tiny hearts beat in sync with their mothers, already writing their own story of triumph over betrayal, of love stronger than loss, of 3 miracles growing in the space where one heart had been broken. The chapter of Melvin's betrayal was ending, but a new one was just beginning, written in triplicate, signed with 3 heartbeats, and sealed with a mother's boundless love. Chapter 4. The battle begins. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle loomed against the autumn sky like a modernist fortress. At 4 months pregnant, Adaisy's condition wasn't yet visible beneath her expertly tailored Chanel suit, but she felt the weight of her secret as she climbed the granite steps. Zara walked beside her, while James Patterson and his legal team formed a protective phalanx around them, shielding her from the gathered press. Inside courtroom 15A, Judge Rebecca Martinez's reputation for zero tolerance of corporate malfeasance was evident in the tense atmosphere. The judge's chambers had already issued 3 emergency injunctions against Melvin's attempts to liquidate overseas assets, and today's hearing promised to be explosive. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice cut through the murmuring crowd as Judge Martinez entered, her silver hair catching the morning light streaming through the high windows. Adaise noticed how the judge's sharp eyes took in everything, including Melvin's conspicuous absence and his lawyer's obvious discomfort. Howard Klein, Melvin's attorney, rose first. "Your Honor, my client wishes to appear via video conference from Singapore, where pressing business matters." "Mr. Klein," Judge Martinez interrupted, her tone arctic, "your client has been ordered to appear in person no fewer than 3 times. His continued defiance of this court's orders is noted. Proceed." The next 4 hours were a masterclass in legal warfare. James Patterson methodically laid out the evidence of Melvin's systematic betrayal, financial records showing the carefully orchestrated transfer of assets, email trails suggesting corporate espionage with Victoria Zhang, witness statements from Chadtech employees about suspicious meetings and deleted files. "Your Honor," James continued, pulling up a complex diagram on the courtroom screens, "this shows the movement of approximately $47 million through a series of shell companies, all established in the months leading up to Mr. Chad's departure. The timing correlates perfectly with his meetings with Ms. Zhang of Rivaltech, suggesting a coordinated effort to not only abandon his marital and corporate responsibilities, but to actively undermine Chadtech's market position." Howard Klein attempted to paint it as simple marital discord coupled with legitimate business decisions, but even he seemed to realize how weak his arguments sounded. The evidence was damning, and Judge Martinez's expression grew stormier with each revelation. When the screens finally flickered to life with Melvin's video feed from Singapore, Adaeze felt her heart stutter. He looked exactly the same, handsome, polished, confident, yet somehow like a stranger. The man she'd loved and built a life with seemed to have vanished, replaced by this cold-eyed corporate raider. "Mr. Chad," Judge Martinez addressed him directly, "would you care to explain why you've repeatedly ignored this court's orders to appear in person?" Melvin's smile was practiced, professional. "Your Honor, my current business obligations in Asia make personal appearance impossible. I have every intention of complying with the court's final decisions, but—" "Save it," the judge cut him off. "Mr. Chad, are you aware that failure to appear in person can result in contempt charges? That this court has the authority to freeze all your known assets worldwide pending resolution of these matters?" For the first time, Adaeze saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Melvin's face. She pressed a hand to her stomach, where 3 tiny lives fluttered beneath her ribs. The babies had been active all morning, as if they could sense the importance of this day. Howard Klein jumped in quickly. "Your Honor, my client is prepared to offer a generous settlement to expedite these proceedings. Mrs. Chad—" "Ms. Herbert," Adaeze corrected firmly, speaking for the first time. The room fell silent at her voice. "Ms. Herbert," Klein continued smoothly, "would retain significant shares in Chadtech, a generous monthly alimony, and—" "Objection, Your Honor," James interrupted. "This attempted settlement completely ignores the criminal nature of Mr. Chad's actions. We have evidence of extensive securities fraud, corporate espionage, and—" The back and forth continued, but Adaze's attention was drawn to the video screen. For a brief moment, Melvin's mask slipped, and she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the first inkling that his carefully constructed plans might not proceed as smoothly as he'd anticipated. A wave of nausea hit her suddenly. "Hormone-induced rather than nerves, Doctor," Patel had explained. She must have swayed slightly because Zara's hand was instantly on her elbow, steadying her. The movement caught Melvin's attention through the video feed, and his eyes narrowed slightly. "Ms. Herbert," Judge Martinez's voice cut through the legal arguments, "are you all right?" "Yes, Your Honor. Just a moment of lightheadedness. If I could have a brief recess?" The judge nodded, clearly noting how Zara helped her sister from the courtroom. In the private bathroom, Adaeze splashed cold water on her face while Zara stood guard. "He's watching you too closely," Zara observed. "We need to be more careful about hiding the pregnancy if he figures it out too soon." "I know." Adaeze dried her face carefully, checking her makeup. 4 more weeks. Dr. Patel says after that, even if he finds out, it won't matter legally. The babies will be viable. My position will be stronger." When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Martinez was reading through a thick file of financial documents. She looked up as Adaeze took her seat, and for a moment, their eyes met. Something passed between them, a flash of understanding perhaps, or recognition of a shared experience. Later, Adaeze would learn that the judge had her own history with corporate betrayal, though she'd come through it to become one of the most respected jurists in the Pacific Northwest. "Mr. Klein," the judge addressed Melvin's lawyer, "your client's repeated absence forces this court to take decisive action. I am ordering an immediate freeze of all assets connected to Mr. Chad, both personal and corporate, pending a full investigation by the SEC and federal prosecutors. Furthermore—" The video feed suddenly went black. "Technical difficulties, Your Honor," Klein stammered, but the judge's expression suggested she wasn't buying it. "How convenient," she noted dryly. Let the record show that Mr. Chad terminated his video appearance immediately prior to the court's ruling on asset seizure. The next hour brought a series of increasingly severe rulings: emergency injunctions against any further asset transfers, mandatory preservation of all corporate communications, and a clear warning that continued non-appearance would result in arrest warrants being issued through international law enforcement channels. As they left the courthouse, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters shouted questions about Melvin's absence, about Victoria Zhang's role, about the future of Chadtech. Daisy kept her head high, letting James handle the official statements, while she focused on maintaining her composure. Back at the penthouse, her support team assembled for a strategy session. Marcus had news from Chadtech's board meeting. Support for Adai's was stronger than ever, with several key investors publicly backing her leadership. The company's stock had actually risen after news of the judge's rulings broke. "The market likes stability," Marcus explained, "and right now you represent stability while Melvin looks like a loose cannon." Dr. Patel arrived for Daisy's scheduled checkup, shooing everyone but Zara from the room. The portable ultrasound revealed 3 strong heartbeats, 3 perfect profiles, 3 sets of tiny hands and feet. "They're dancers today," Dr. Patel observed with a smile, watching the babies move. All that courtroom drama must have excited them. Later that night, alone in her bedroom, Adais pulled out the ultrasound photos she kept hidden in her nightstand. 3 miracle babies growing stronger every day, completely unknown to their father, who was plotting his next moves from a luxury hotel suite in Singapore. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You won this round, but you have no idea what's coming." She should have been scared, or angry, or at least anxious. Instead, she felt oddly calm as she replied, "Neither do you." Then she blocked the number, placed a protective hand over her growing belly, and began her nightly ritual of talking to her babies. She told them about their heritage, both Nigerian and American, about the grandmother they would never meet but whose spirit watched over them, about the aunt who would spoil them endlessly, about the future she was fighting to secure for them. What she didn't tell them about was their father, or his betrayal, or the battles still to come. There would be time enough for those stories later. For now, she focused on love, on hope, on the strength that comes from knowing you're never truly alone when you carry your purpose inside you. Outside her window, Seattle's lights twinkled like fallen stars, and somewhere in a Singapore hotel room, Melvin Chad was learning that some battles can't be won with money or power or carefully crafted legal strategies. Sometimes the strongest weapon is a secret held close to the heart, growing stronger with each passing day, beating in triple time with the rhythm of justice yet to come. And in the quiet of her bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that was ending and the promise of one about to begin in triplicate, Adais Herbert smiled. The battle had indeed begun, but not the one Melvin thought he was fighting. This was a battle for legacy, for justice, for the future of 3 tiny hearts whose very existence would change everything. Let him plot in Singapore. Let him think he knew what game they were playing. In exactly 4 weeks, she would reveal her trump card, and all his carefully laid plans would crumble in the face of a truth he never saw coming: that sometimes the biggest victories come in the smallest packages, wrapped in hope and delivered in triplicate. Chapter 5. The Birth Seattle's winter rain pattered against the windows of Swedish Medical Center's VIP suite, where Adaize had been on mandatory bed rest for the past 3 weeks. At 32 weeks pregnant with triplets, every day the babies stayed inside was a victory. The medical team, led by Dr. Maya Patel, had transformed the luxury room into a high-tech command center, monitoring 3 precious heartbeats around the clock. The legal war with Melvin had reached a fever pitch since the revelation of her pregnancy. The media circus that followed the announcement had been exactly what James Patterson predicted: explosive. Global headlines screamed about the tech mogul who had abandoned his pregnant wife, unknowingly leaving behind not one child, but three. ChadTech's stock had actually surged as public sympathy rallied behind Adaize, while rival tech faced increasing scrutiny over Victoria Zhang's role in the corporate espionage scandal. Zara had practically moved into the hospital suite, converting a corner into a mobile law office. She was on a video call with James when Adaize first felt the contractions. "Something's happening," Adaize interrupted, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. The monitors began chiming in harmony as all three babies responded to their mother's rising stress levels. Dr. Patel arrived within minutes, her usual calm demeanor masking the urgency in her movements. 32 weeks and 4 days, she noted, checking the monitors. "Not ideal, but the steroids we gave you last week should have helped with lung development. These little ones are ready to make their debut." The next few hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The delivery team had rehearsed this moment for weeks. 3 separate teams of specialists, one for each baby, coordinating with military precision. The VIP floor's security detail, hired by Marcus to prevent any media intrusion, doubled their presence. In the delivery room, under harsh surgical lights, Adaize felt strangely peaceful despite her fear. "Talk to me," she requested as Dr. Patel began the C-section. "Tell me what's happening." "Baby A is eager to meet you," Dr. Patel narrated from behind her surgical mask. "A little boy, and here he is." The first cry pierced the air at 3:47 a.m. Strong, defiant, ready to take on the world. "Alexander," Adaize whispered the name she'd chosen months ago. Zara, suited up in surgical scrubs beside her, squeezed her hand. "Baby B coming now," Dr. Patel continued. "Another boy, a bit smaller but fighting spirit." Benjamin's cry joined his brother's at 3:49 a.m., slightly softer but equally determined. "And here comes your daughter. She's taking her time, just like a proper lady." Charlotte's first cry at 3:52 a.m. completed the symphony. 3 babies, 3 cries, 3 new lives entering the world within 5 minutes of each other on that stormy April morning. The neonatal teams worked with practiced efficiency, whisking each baby to waiting incubators. Despite being 8 weeks early, all 3 showed remarkable strength. Alexander weighed 4 pounds, 2 ounces, Benjamin 3 pounds, 15 ounces, and Charlotte an even 4 pounds. All excellent weights for triplets. As Dr. Patel completed the surgery, Adaize listened to the medical teams calling out vital signs and test results. Her babies were being evaluated, measured, monitored, their first moments documented with scientific precision. But what the medical charts couldn't capture was the way Alexander gripped the nurse's finger with surprising strength, how Benjamin's eyes seemed to search the room despite being only minutes old, how Charlotte's tiny hand reached out when she heard her mother's voice. In the recovery room, surrounded by beeping monitors and the soft whoosh of oxygen, Adaize finally got to meet her children properly. The NICU team had arranged 3 incubators in a semicircle around her bed, allowing her to see all 3 babies at once. "They're perfect," Zara whispered, tears streaming down her face as she helped Adaize reach out to touch each baby through the incubator ports. "Mom would be so proud." Alexander, already showing signs of being the leader, had a full head of dark curls and Melvin's strong jawline. Benjamin, smaller but equally fierce, had inherited Adaize's high cheekbones and determined chin. And Charlotte, the surprise finale, was a perfect blend of both parents, with delicate features and skin the color of honey. The news of the triplets' birth broke despite the hospital's tight security. By morning, the media gathered outside Swedish Medical Center, hungry for details about the tech world's most dramatic delivery, as one headline put it. James Patterson held a brief press conference, announcing only that mother and babies were healthy and requesting privacy. In Singapore, Melvin learned of his children's birth through CNN's breaking news alert. His immediate attempts to contact the hospital were blocked. Zara had arranged for a complete communications lockdown. His lawyer's demands for immediate access were met with a wall of legal documents and medical directives about protecting premature infants from stress and outside contact. Days turned into weeks as the triplets grew stronger in the NICU. Adais practically lived in a recliner between their incubators, splitting her time equally among her three miracles. She learned each baby's unique personality. Alexander, the protective firstborn, who seemed to calm his siblings with his presence. Benjamin, the determined fighter, who reached every developmental milestone with fierce concentration. And Charlotte, the peacemaker, whose tiny coos could soothe her brother's fussing. The NICU nurses taught her everything: how to change diapers smaller than her palm, how to feed babies who seemed impossibly tiny, how to read the monitors that tracked their every breath. She pumped breast milk religiously, celebrating each gram her babies gained as a personal victory. Marcus visited daily, bringing updates about ChadTech and coordinating with the security team. The company had thrived in her absence, her leadership team proving their loyalty by keeping everything running smoothly. The SEC investigation into Melvin and Victoria Zhang had expanded, with federal prosecutors now involved. 1 month after the births, as Seattle's spring rain gave way to early summer sunshine, Dr. Patel delivered the news they'd been waiting for. The triplets were strong enough to go home. Alexander, now a robust 6 pounds, led the way as usual. Benjamin had caught up to his brother's weight through sheer determination, while Charlotte remained slightly smaller, but perfectly healthy. The day they left the hospital was a carefully orchestrated operation. Marcus had arranged for 3 identical black SUVs to leave simultaneously, confusing the paparazzi about which vehicle actually carried the babies. The penthouse had been completely redesigned during Adai's hospital stay, Melvin's former spaces transformed into a state-of-the-art nursery suite with separate sleeping areas that could be monitored from a central point. That first night home, after the nurses and helpers had left, after Zara had finally been convinced to get some real sleep in the guest room, Adai sat in the nursery's central glider. Each baby slept peacefully in their crib, monitored by both modern technology and ancient maternal instinct. "Welcome home, my warriors," she whispered to her sleeping children. "Welcome to the beginning of our story." She looked around the room, taking in the subtle African-inspired designs she'd chosen for the decor, the high-tech monitoring systems Marcus had insisted on, the 3 identical cribs arranged so each baby could sense their siblings' presence. Everything in triplicate, yet each item carefully chosen to be slightly different, just like the babies themselves. Alexander stirred first, his dark eyes opening to find his mother. She lifted him carefully, marveling at how natural it felt now to handle these tiny beings who had once seemed so fragile. Benjamin woke next, never wanting to be left out of anything his brother did. Charlotte completed the reunion moments later, as if sensing her brothers were getting attention without her. Somehow, Adai managed to settle all 3 babies against her chest, their tiny hearts beating in different rhythms that somehow created a perfect harmony. She told them stories about their Nigerian heritage, about the grandmother watching over them from heaven, about the strength they carried in their blood. What she didn't tell them was how their father's lawyers had filed motion after motion demanding access, how James Patterson had countered each attempt with evidence of Melvin's ongoing financial manipulation and corporate crimes, how Judge Martinez had issued a temporary order barring any contact until the criminal investigations were complete. They didn't need to know yet about the trust funds being set up with recovered assets, or about how their birth had sparked a global conversation about corporate ethics and family responsibilities. They didn't need to understand how their very existence had changed the power dynamics of a billion-dollar legal battle. For now, they just needed to grow, to thrive, to be loved. And love was something Adais had in infinite supply, multiplied by 3 with each beat of her healing heart. As dawn broke over Seattle's skyline, painting the nursery in soft golden light, Adais Herbert held her 3 miracles close and made them a promise. Your story will not be defined by his absence, but by my presence, by our strength, by the love that turned one broken heart into 3 perfect new beginnings. The babies slept on, unaware that they were living proof of life's most powerful truth, that sometimes the best revenge is not just living well, but living beautifully, purposefully, and in triplicate. Chapter 6. The Accidental Discovery. 10 years had passed since Melvin Chad walked away from his marriage, leaving behind more than he knew. Seattle had changed in the decades since his departure. New towers piercing the skyline, tech companies reshaping the city's DNA. But nothing had changed as dramatically as the 3 children he was about to discover. The October morning dawned crisp and clear, unusual for Seattle's typically rainy autumn. Melvin had returned to the city for Tech Connect 2015, the industry's biggest conference, where he would be speaking about his Singapore-based empire. The irony wasn't lost on him that ChadTech's booth at the conference was larger than his. Its success under Adaisi's leadership, a constant reminder of what he'd left behind. He'd chosen to stay at the Four Seasons rather than his usual Fairmont, avoiding the hotel where he and Adais had celebrated their early successes. His marriage to Victoria Zhang had crumbled 3 years ago, their relationship poisoned by the same ambition that had initially drawn them together. Now, at 45, Melvin Chad was discovering that success without connection left a peculiar emptiness. Seeking escape from pre-conference preparations, he decided to walk to Pike Place Market. The familiar descent down Pine Street felt like walking through memories. The coffee shop where he'd first pitched investors, the corner where he'd kissed Adais after closing their first major deal, the bookstore where they'd spent rainy Sundays planning their future. The market was bustling with its usual weekend energy, tourists photographing fish-throwing demonstrations, locals selecting produce from long-time vendors, the smell of fresh flowers and baking bread mixing with the salty breeze off Elliott Bay. Melvin stopped at his old favorite coffee stand, ordering the complex pour-over that had fueled countless coding sessions. That's when he saw them. 3 10-year-old children stood at the chocolate shop across the way, their private school uniforms marking them as students from Seattle Prep. Something about their bearing caught his attention. The way they carried themselves, perhaps, or the familiar tilt of their heads as they studied the display. The girl was sketching in a leather-bound notebook, her artistic focus reminding him painfully of Adais in their early days, when she would design user interfaces in similar notebooks. Her honey-colored skin and high cheekbones were an echo of features he saw in his mirror every morning. One boy sat on a nearby bench, completely absorbed in a laptop that looked more sophisticated than standard kid equipment. His fingers flew over the keyboard with a familiar intensity, the same intensity Melvin remembered from his own teenage coding days. The boy's jawline was unmistakably his own. The second boy was doing what appeared to be swimming stretches, his athletic frame suggesting years of training. But it was his profile that stopped Melvin's heart. A perfect blend of his own features and Adai's, animated by the kind of energy he remembered from his younger self. Their caregiver, an elegant woman in her 50s who radiated professional competence, was engaged in what seemed to be an important phone call several feet away. She wore an earpiece that Melvin recognized as high-end security equipment, suggesting these weren't ordinary, wealthy children. Time seemed to stop as reality rearranged itself in his mind. The dates aligned with horrible precision. These children would have been conceived just before he left. The girl's artistic focus, the programmer's intensity, the athlete's drive. They were reflections of himself and Adais, multiplied and redistributed across three distinct personalities. His coffee slipped from nerveless fingers, splashing across the market's brick pavement. The sound drew the children's attention briefly, but they dismissed him as just another clumsy tourist. They couldn't know they were looking at their father. They couldn't know that their casual glance had just shattered his carefully constructed world. Melvin stumbled backward into Le Panier, the French bakery where he and Adais used to buy morning croissants. The familiar smell of butter and sugar now made him nauseated as his mind raced through implications. Triplets. He had triplets. 3 children he'd never known about, growing up in the same city he'd abandoned, probably walking the same streets, maybe even living in the same penthouse. Through the bakery window, he watched them interact. The programmer boy, he couldn't think of them as his children yet, the concept was too enormous, showed something on his laptop to his siblings. The girl sketched faster, apparently inspired by whatever she saw on the screen, while the athletic boy offered suggestions that made all 3 laugh. Their laughter carried through the glass, a sound so painfully familiar it made his chest ache. They had his laugh. Or maybe it was Adais's. He could no longer remember which parts of their shared life had belonged to whom. The security-conscious caregiver finished her call and gathered the children with practiced efficiency. Alexander, time to pack up the laptop. Benjamin, you'll be late for swim practice. Charlotte, darling, you can finish your sketch in the car. The names hit him like physical blows. Alexander, Benjamin, and Charlotte. His children had names, personalities, lives that had been unfolding parallel to his own for a decade. While he'd been building his Singapore empire, they'd been growing, learning, becoming people without him. He watched them walk away, their movements synchronized in the unconscious way of siblings who had grown up together. Alexander carefully packed his laptop in what looked like a custom case. Benjamin did a few more stretches, his athletic grace obvious even in casual movement. Charlotte added one last detail to her sketch before carefully closing her notebook. The caregiver ushered them toward the market's main entrance, where Melvin noticed a black SUV with tinted windows waiting. The vehicle's professional driver and subtle security features suggested serious protection, the kind of security he himself used. Of course, Adais would ensure their safety. Of course, she would give them every advantage, every protection. Once they were gone, Melvin found himself unable to move from his spot in the bakery. The staff gave him concerned looks as he stood there, gripping a table for support, his world tilting on its axis. His phone buzzed. Messages about the conference, about business deals, about the empire he'd built on the foundation of his betrayal. None of it seemed to matter anymore. All he could see were 3 faces that carried his features, 3 lives that should have included him, 3 stories he had no part in. Finally, he managed to walk out of the bakery, past his spilled coffee that had now been cleaned up, past the chocolate shop where his children had stood minutes ago. He found himself at the market's famous viewpoint, staring out at the ferryboats crossing Elliott Bay. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and did what he should have done years ago. He searched for information about Adais Herbert Chad. The results were illuminating. She had dropped his name professionally, but kept it legally, presumably for the children. Chad Tech had flourished under her leadership, its success far exceeding his own company's growth. Then he found it, a society page photo from a charity gala 3 months ago. Adais, still stunning at 42, stood proudly with 3 children. The caption confirmed his reality. Chad Tech CEO Adais Herbert with her triplets, Alexander, Benjamin and Charlotte, at the annual Tech Futures Foundation benefit. More photos followed as he dug deeper. The children at various tech events, always poised, always protected. Alexander accepting a Young Innovator Award, His coding skills apparently already remarkable. Benjamin at swim meets, collecting medals. Charlotte's artwork featured in school exhibitions. They were extraordinary, these children he had never known. Their achievements filled page after page of local news and social media. They were clearly being raised with every advantage, every opportunity, everything he and Adais had once dreamed of providing for their future family. His phone buzzed again, Victoria Zhang's name appearing on the screen. Even now, years after their marriage ended, she still reached out occasionally about business opportunities. He declined the call, a bitter laugh escaping him as he realized how completely his priorities had just shifted. The autumn sun was setting over Puget Sound, painting the water in shades of gold and purple. 10 years ago, he had watched a similar sunset from a plane taking him to Singapore, convinced he was heading toward a grander future. Now he stood rooted to this spot, understanding finally that he had been running in the wrong direction all along. Back in his hotel room, Melvin spent the night investigating everything he could find about his children. Social media provided fragments, Alexander's participation in coding competitions, Benjamin's swimming records, Charlotte's art shows. Each achievement, each captured moment, felt like a personal accusation, spaces where he should have been present, proud, involved. He found himself studying their faces obsessively, trying to catalogue which features came from him, which from Adais, which were uniquely their own. Alexander had his analytical stare, but Adais's gentle mouth. Benjamin carried himself with Melvin's confidence, but had his mother's expressive eyes. Charlotte was an artist like her mother, but with his focused intensity. The conference speech he was supposed to be preparing lay forgotten as he lost himself in this archaeological dig through his children's lives. Every discovery brought equal measures of pride and pain. Pride in their accomplishments, pain at his absence from their journey. As dawn broke over Seattle, Melvin Chad faced himself in his hotel mirror and saw what he had become. A man who had everything he had thought he wanted and nothing of what truly mattered. His carefully constructed life, his corporate success, his international reputation, all of it felt hollow in the face of 3 young lives that had bloomed without him. His phone buzzed with a message from his conference coordinator reminding him about his keynote speech in 3 hours. He was supposed to talk about building global tech empires, a topic that now seemed absurd. What empire could compare to the kingdom of 3 hearts he had unknowingly left behind? The man who stared back at him from the mirror looked successful, polished, wealthy. But for the first time in 10 years, Melvin Chad saw himself clearly. A father who had abandoned not just his wife, but 3 miraculous children, who had grown up calling another man Uncle Marcus, instead of calling him Dad. The weight of his choices, multiplied now by 3, settled onto his shoulders like a physical burden. As Seattle awakened to another autumn day, Melvin Chad began to understand that some costs can never be calculated in dollars, and some losses can never be recovered, even with all the success in the world. Chapter 7. The Conditions. April 15th, 2015 marked the triplets' 10th birthday, though Melvin observed it only through social media posts and carefully encrypted surveillance photos. In the 6 months since his accidental discovery at Pike Place Market, his entire world had reorganized itself around 3 children who didn't know he existed. The manila envelope arrived at his Singapore office exactly 1 day after their birthday celebration. The return address was James Patterson's law firm, but Melvin recognized the handwriting on the internal envelope. Adais's elegant script hadn't changed in a decade. His executive assistant had just brought in his morning coffee when he opened it. The cup crashed to his imported marble floor as he read the first page, coffee spreading like spilled ink across the pristine surface. "Dear Mr. Chad," the letter began formally, though the handwriting was intimately familiar. Recent events have made it clear that you're aware of Alexander, Benjamin, and Charlotte's existence. Before you attempt any contact, you need to understand some non-negotiable conditions. Melvin sank into his ergonomic chair, the Singapore skyline blurring through his floor-to-ceiling windows as he read on. The document was comprehensive, backed by years of legal preparation and documentation. Each word felt like a judgment, each paragraph a sentence for his crimes. The first condition struck like a physical blow. You will have no contact with the children until they turn 18. Any attempt to circumvent this, directly or through intermediaries, will result in immediate criminal charges for your financial crimes and corporate espionage, for which we have accumulated extensive evidence over the past decade. Attached was a USB drive containing sample evidence, email trails proving his collusion with Victoria Jiang, financial records showing his systematic draining of company assets, testimonies from former employees about destroyed documents and stolen trade secrets. The magnitude of documentation was staggering. Adais had been building this case for 10 years, preparing for this moment. His hands shook as he read the second condition. You will contribute substantially to trust funds for each child, managed by an independent trustee. The amount and terms are non-negotiable. The specified sum would take a significant portion of his liquid assets, but it wasn't about the money. It was about accountability, about putting something tangible behind his moral debt. The third condition felt both merciful and cruel. When the children turn 18, any reunion will be entirely on their terms, not yours. They will know the full truth of your abandonment, and they alone will decide if they wish to know you. Supporting documents outlined a decade of their lives, report cards showing Alexander's perfect grades, Benjamin's athletic achievements, Charlotte's artistic awards. Medical records documented their premature birth, their NICU stays, their early milestones. Each piece of paper represented a moment he'd missed, a responsibility he'd abandoned. Your actions 10 years ago, Adai's letter continued, demonstrated that you were not ready for the privilege of parenthood. These conditions are not punishment. They are protection for 3 children who deserve better than a father who could abandon their mother without a backward glance. Melvin's legal team arrived within the hour, summoned by his shell-shocked assistant. They pored over the documents, looking for loopholes, weaknesses, points of leverage. They found none. She's been planning this for years, his chief counsel admitted, studying the evidence. The criminal charges alone could put you away for decades. The corporate espionage angle, it's bulletproof. She has witnesses, paper trails, everything. There must be some way to fight this, Melvin insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. The photos spread across his desk told their own story. Alexander accepting a coding award, his stance a mirror of Melvin's own confidence. Benjamin at a swim meet, displaying the same competitive focus Melvin had once brought to business deals. Charlotte at an art exhibition, her pieces showing a depth of perception that reminded him painfully of Adais. His lawyers exchanged glances. Fighting this would be unwise, the senior partner said carefully. The evidence of financial crimes alone and the publicity would be devastating. Your shareholders would revolt. As if on cue, Melvin's phone buzzed with a message from James Patterson. Any attempt to challenge these conditions will result in immediate filing of criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions. Choose wisely. The Singapore sun set in a blaze of orange and purple as Melvin sat alone in his office, surrounding himself with evidence of his children's lives. School photos showed their growth year by year, faces changing, personalities emerging, achievements mounting. They were extraordinary children, these 3 he'd never known. A video file on the USB drive caught his attention, security footage from the day he'd seen them at Pike Place Market. He watched himself discover them, saw the moment recognition hit him, witnessed his own world shifting on its axis. The footage continued after he'd fled into the bakery, showing the children's interaction with their caregiver, who, he now realized, was no ordinary nanny but a highly trained security professional. Another file contained background checks on everyone who regularly interacted with the children: teachers, coaches, friends, parents. The thoroughness of their protection humbled him. Adais had created an impenetrable fortress around their children, guarding them not just from harm, but from the pain of his abandonment. His phone rang, Victoria Zhang, probably calling about their competing bids for a new tech startup. He declined the call, realizing how hollow his ambitions felt in the face of what he'd lost. The empire he'd built, the wealth he'd accumulated, the power he'd amassed. None of it could buy back the decade of fatherhood he'd thrown away. Late that night, after his lawyers had gone and the Singapore skyline glittered like fallen stars, Melvin wrote his response to Adais's conditions. His hands trembled as he typed, "I accept all conditions without reservation. The trust funds will be established immediately. I understand that I have no right to ask anything of you or them, but please know that I regret my actions more deeply than I can express. When they're ready, if they're ever ready, I will be here." He attached documentation of the trust fund's creation, using even more money than specified. It felt like a paltry offering against the weight of his absence, but it was all he could do. James Patterson's response came within minutes. Funds received. Remember, any contact before their 18th birthday will trigger immediate legal action. This is your only warning. Melvin spent that night watching every video, studying every photo, reading every report card and achievement notice included in the files. He learned that Alexander had started coding at 6, just as he had, that Benjamin's swimming times were already approaching junior Olympic levels, that Charlotte's art had won national competitions. He discovered their favorite foods, their hobbies, their fears and dreams, all documented in school reports and medical records. Alexander was allergic to peanuts, just like him. Benjamin had inherited Adais's perfect pitch. Charlotte showed early signs of dyslexia, but had overcome it through art therapy. Dawn found him still at his desk, surrounded by the paper trail of 3 lives he had no part in shaping. His empire felt like a hollow victory now, his success bitter in his mouth. He had built his fortune on the foundation of betrayal, and the price was higher than he'd ever imagined. In Seattle, where it was still yesterday, his children were probably getting ready for bed. He wondered if they shared his tendency toward night owl habits, if they had inherited his love of science fiction, if they questioned their origin story or accepted the carefully crafted narrative Adais must have given them. 8 years stretched ahead before any possibility of contact. 8 years in which they would continue growing, learning, becoming themselves without him. His only connection would be through carefully curated updates from James Patterson's office, dry legal documents outlining his children's achievements and milestones. Melvin closed the last file and walked to his window, watching Singapore come alive with morning light. In his reflection, he saw what he had become, a man who had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. The conditions Adais had set weren't just about protecting their children. They were a mirror showing him exactly who he was and what he had thrown away. His phone buzzed with business messages, meeting requests, urgent decisions needed for his empire. None of it seemed important anymore. He had 3 trust funds to establish, 3 futures to secure from afar, 3 debts that could never truly be repaid. As the morning sun painted his office in shades of gold, Melvin Chad began the process of restructuring his life around an 8-year wait, knowing that even then, redemption would not be guaranteed. The conditions were set, the boundaries drawn, the consequences clear. All he could do now was honor them, and hoped that someday 3 extraordinary children might find it in their hearts to give him a chance he didn't deserve. Chapter 8. The growing year's time moved differently when measured in the milestones of 3 extraordinary children. Between their 10th and 18th birthdays, Alexander, Benjamin, and Charlotte Chad Herbert grew from promising children into remarkable young adults, each carving their own path while remaining inextricably connected to each other. Alexander's coding prowess blossomed into genuine innovation by age 16. In the gleaming ChadTech Development Lab, a space Adese had created specifically for young tech pioneers, he developed an artificial intelligence algorithm that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. The project, which he named Phoenix in an unconscious nod to his mother's rise from the ashes of betrayal, attracted attention from Silicon Valley's biggest names. "Mom," he called out one evening, his fingers flying over his custom keyboard, "I think I've solved the quantum encryption problem that's been stumping the dev team." Adese looked up from her own work, recognizing in her son's intense focus an echo of Melvin's coding marathons. But where Melvin had channeled his talent into personal gain, Alexander was different. His innovations always seemed to serve a larger purpose: protecting privacy, enhancing security, making technology more accessible to those who needed it most. Benjamin's athletic career soared beyond swimming into multiple disciplines. His drive matched his brother's, but manifested physically. By 16, he held state records in swimming, had earned a black belt in karate, and was being scouted by Olympic development teams. "It's about control," he explained to Charlotte during one of their late-night sibling conversations. "When I'm in the water or on the mat, everything makes sense. Every movement has a purpose. Every breath matters." What he didn't say, but his sister understood, was that sports gave him a way to process the complex emotions around their father's absence. Each lap, each kata, each perfectly executed dive was a way of proving his worth to someone who wasn't there to see it. Charlotte's artistic talent evolved in unexpected directions. While her early years focused on traditional media, by 15 she had merged art with technology, creating interactive installations that combined her painting skills with Alexander's programming expertise. Her pieces explored themes of absence, presence, and the space between, though she never explicitly connected this to their family story. Her most striking installation, unveiled at Seattle's prestigious Foster Gallery, featured 3 interconnected chambers filled with mirrors and digital displays. Viewers walking through experienced a sense of presence and absence simultaneously, their reflections multiplying and vanishing in ways that left them questioning what was real and what was reflection. "It's about perspective," she told the art critics, but her siblings knew it was about more than that. It was about the way they'd grown up feeling simultaneously whole and incomplete, their trinity both perfect and missing a crucial element. Adese watched her children's evolution with a complex mixture of pride and protection. Every achievement, every milestone was documented and added to the quarterly reports sent to James Patterson's office, reports she knew would eventually reach Melvin. "They're thriving," she told Zara during one of their sister nights after the kids had gone to bed. "Sometimes I wonder if they're thriving because of his absence rather than in spite of it." Zara, who had remained a fierce guardian of their family unit, considered this. "They're thriving because you gave them roots and wings. His absence is just negative space in their portrait, visible but not defining." The children knew the basic outline of their father's story, that he had left before knowing about them, that he had chosen ambition over family, that he had built an empire in Singapore while they built their lives in Seattle. What they didn't know was how he had discovered them, or about the conditions that kept him at bay. Their questions about him evolved as they grew. At 12, they wanted simple facts. Did they get their height from him? Their eye color? their various talents? At 14, their queries turned more complex. Had he ever tried to contact them? Did he know about their achievements? Did he regret leaving? Adaze answered truthfully but carefully, never demonizing him but never excusing his choices either. Your father made decisions based on who he was then, she would say. Who he is now, and what that means for your future relationship with him, will be something you can decide when you're ready. The media remained fascinated by the family, though Adaze's security team, led by the same woman who had been present during Melvin's market discovery, kept them at a respectful distance. The children learned to navigate public interest with grace, neither hiding from nor seeking attention. Their 16th birthday party made headlines not for its extravagance, but for its purpose. The siblings had turned the celebration into a fundraiser for tech education in underserved communities. Alexander demonstrated coding basics to eager students. Benjamin led athletic workshops, and Charlotte helped kids express themselves through digital art. In Singapore, Melvin received the quarterly report about the event with his usual mixture of pride and pain. His company had anonymously matched every donation made that day, though few knew that the mysterious Phoenix Foundation that supported so many of the triplets' charitable initiatives was actually their father's way of contributing beyond the trust funds. As their high school years progressed, each child began mapping their future paths. Alexander's innovations had already earned him early acceptance letters from every top tech university, though he surprised everyone by expressing interest in ChadTech's development program instead. Why spend 4 years learning theory, he argued, when I can build something real? Benjamin's Olympic potential had coaches competing for his attention, but he remained undecided. There's more to life than medals, he confided to his mother during one of their early morning talks. I want to find something that matters beyond scores and times. Charlotte's art had opened doors to prestigious art schools, but she too seemed to be searching for something more. Her installations grew more complex, more questioning, as if she was working out her own identity through her creations. Their approaching 18th birthday loomed like a horizon line, carrying the weight of possibilities and decisions. They didn't know that in Singapore, their father had already begun the process of restructuring his company, preparing for a possible return to Seattle. They didn't know about the comprehensive files he had maintained, documenting every newspaper mention, every achievement, every public moment of their lives. One evening, about 6 months before they would turn 18, the siblings sat on their penthouse balcony watching the sunset over Puget Sound. The same balcony where, 18 years earlier, their father had bid their mother a calculated farewell, not knowing he was also saying goodbye to them. "Do you ever wonder," Charlotte asked, sketching the skyline in her ever-present notebook, "if he thinks about us?" Alexander looked up from his laptop, where he was fine-tuning his latest algorithm. Statistically, given the public nature of our achievements and his demonstrated pattern of monitoring market competitors, it's highly unlikely he's unaware of our existence and progress. Benjamin, stretching after his evening workout, smiled at his brother's analytical approach. What Alex means is, yes, we all wonder. But does it matter? We're who we are because of Mom, because of each other. Anything else is just optional data. The sunset painted the sky in shades of possibility, and somewhere in that gathering dusk lay the answer to questions they hadn't yet learned to ask. Their story was approaching a crossroads, though they didn't know it yet. In Singapore, their father was preparing for the day they might want to know him. In Seattle, their mother was preparing for the day she might have to share them. But for now, they were still just 3 extraordinary teenagers on a balcony, watching the sun sink into the sound, their futures stretching before them like the lights of the city below, bright, complex, and full of possibility. The growing years had shaped them in ways neither parent could have predicted. They had inherited their father's drive and their mother's resilience. but had transformed these traits into something uniquely their own. They were neither the products of abandonment nor the results of protection, but rather three distinct individuals who had grown into themselves despite and because of their complex heritage. As night fell over Seattle, three hearts beat in sync with possibilities, unaware that across the Pacific, a fourth heart was counting down the days until it might have the chance to beat in rhythm with theirs again. Chapter 9. The Decision. The countdown to their 18th birthday began in earnest during their final semester of high school. Dr. Sarah Cohen's office, with its calming blue walls and view of Lake Washington, had become a sanctuary for the triplets over the past year. As their family therapist, she helped them navigate the complex emotions surrounding the approaching milestone that would give them the right to meet their father. "Let's talk about what's changed since last week," Dr. Cohen suggested during one of their group sessions. The siblings had their usual seating arrangement. Alexander perched on the edge of the modern armchair, laptop ever present but closed. Benjamin cross-legged on the floor, still in his swim team warm-ups. Charlotte curled into the corner of the sofa, sketchbook open but untouched. "I found his company's latest earnings report," Alexander started, his fingers drumming a coding rhythm on his laptop. "The Phoenix Foundation that's been supporting tech education initiatives. It's him. I traced the shell companies, followed the money trail. He's been watching us, supporting our projects from the shadows." Charlotte's pencil moved across her paper now, capturing her brother's tense posture. "Is that why you've been having trouble sleeping? Because you found out he's been there all along, just hidden?" Alexander nodded, the gesture sharp and precise like his coding. "It's not just that. His company's been restructuring, moving operations gradually from Singapore back to the West Coast. The pattern suggests preparation for a permanent return to Seattle." Benjamin stood and began his habitual stretching, his way of processing emotional tension. "So he's planning to come back whether we want to meet him or not." Typical. Making decisions that affect us without asking, just like he did 18 years ago. Dr. Cohen observed their interaction, noting how they instinctively moved in orbit around each other. Alexander's logic providing the gravity, Benjamin's motion creating the energy, Charlotte's artistry documenting it all. "How do each of you feel about the possibility of him being physically closer?" The question hung in the air like Seattle mist, heavy with unspoken emotions. "I have questions," Alexander said finally. Technical questions about his coding methodology in Chadtech's early days, about the quantum encryption protocols he developed. Professional curiosity, nothing more. But his rapid finger-tapping betrayed deeper anxiety. Benjamin paused mid-stretch. "I want to look him in the eyes. I want him to see what he walked away from, 3 times over." His voice carried an athlete's competitive edge, as if meeting their father was another contest to win. Charlotte's pencil stilled. "I want to know if he sees us in his dreams the way we've sometimes seen him in ours. Those dreams where we have a father who never left, who taught us things, who was proud of us." Her artistic sensitivity always cut straight to the emotional core. Their individual therapy sessions revealed more complex layers. Alexander, alone with Dr. Cohen, admitted his fear that meeting their father would disrupt the algorithms of their lives. "We're a complete system," he explained, drawing diagrams in the air. "Mom, the 3 of us, Aunt Zara, Uncle Marcus. It's a balanced equation. Adding another variable could destabilize everything." Benjamin's solo sessions often ended with him doing handstands against the wall, his way of literally turning perspectives upside down. "Sometimes I think I've forgiven him," he confessed during one such inverted moment. "Then I remember how Mom cried on our 5th birthday, thinking we wouldn't want her anymore if he ever came back. How do you forgive someone for making your mother doubt her own worth?" Charlotte's private sessions were filled with the artwork she couldn't share with her brothers. Paintings of a man with their features but a stranger's eyes, digital installations exploring themes of abandonment and return. "What if he disappoints us?" she whispered once. Or worse, what if he doesn't? What if he's wonderful and we have to live with knowing what we missed all these years? At home, their mother watched their struggle with her own complex emotions. Adaze had built an empire from the ashes of betrayal, had raised 3 extraordinary children alone, had never let them doubt they were enough exactly as they were. Now she had to prepare them for the possibility of letting in the man who had walked away before knowing they existed. "I need you to understand something," she told them one evening, gathering them in their favorite spot on the balcony. "Your father's actions 18 years ago reflect who he was then, not who you are now. His worth as a person doesn't define your worth as his children, and his potential presence in your future doesn't diminish our past together." The siblings processed this in their characteristic ways. Alexander analyzing the logical framework, Benjamin testing the emotional boundaries, Charlotte capturing the moment in quick sketches. As spring bloomed across Seattle, the decision loomed larger. Their 18th birthday approached like an incoming tide, bringing with it the weight of choice. James Patterson's office had already prepared 3 separate sets of paperwork, one for full contact, one for limited interaction, one for maintaining distance. The choice would be entirely theirs. During their final group session before the birthday deadline, Dr. Cohen asked them to share their deepest fears about meeting their father. Alexander spoke first, his usual precision softened by vulnerability. "I'm afraid of seeing too much of him in myself, the way I can lose myself in code, the drive that sometimes makes me forget people aren't programs to be optimized. What if those are his traits? What if I'm becoming him without even knowing him?" Benjamin's fear emerged through movement, his athletic grace turning restless. "I'm afraid of my anger, not just at him, but at myself for wanting to know him despite everything. Every medal, every record. Part of me was showing him what he missed, and I hate that he had that power without even being here." Charlotte's fear flowed through her art, the sketch taking shape under her fingers, showing 3 saplings growing from a broken root. "I'm afraid we'll learn he never really wanted us, that even knowing about us wouldn't have changed his choice to leave, that we're just inconvenient complications in his carefully planned life." Dr. Cohen let their fears exist in the space without trying to solve them. "And what are your hopes?" she asked finally. This question proved harder to answer. Hope, they had learned early, was a dangerous thing when it came to their father. "I hope to understand," Alexander said after a long pause, "not to forgive necessarily, but to understand the variables that created our equation." Benjamin's response came through gritted teeth. "I hope he regrets it. Every day, every achievement, every moment he missed. I hope it keeps him awake at night." Charlotte's hope emerged through her art, her sketch evolving to show new branches grafting onto the broken root. "I hope we're strong, enough to handle whatever we find, good or bad. I hope we can add to our story without erasing any chapters." As their birthday approached, Seattle buzzed with speculation. The tech world remembered the scandal of Melvin Chad's departure, the subsequent rise of Adaze Herbert's leadership, the occasional glimpses of 3 remarkable children growing up in the spotlight of their mother's success. Would the Chad Herbert triplets choose to meet their father? Would the prodigal tech mogul return to Seattle? Would Chad Tech's leadership dynamic shift? But in Dr. Cohen's office, in their penthouse home, in the quiet moments between siblings, the questions were more fundamental. Who were they beyond the story of their father's absence? What did they owe to the man who had given them life but not love? How much of their future should be shaped by their past? The decision, when it came, emerged from one of their late-night sibling councils. Alexander had traced their father's recent movements, confirming his gradual return to Seattle. Benjamin had channeled his feelings into training for Olympic trials. Charlotte had created a triptych of their possible futures, one with their father, one without, one still undefined. "We do it together," Alexander proposed, closing his laptop. "All three of us or none of us. We're a unit. That's been true since before we were born." Benjamin nodded, his athlete's competitiveness softening into solidarity. "Together, we face him the way we've faced everything else. As a team." Charlotte added the final stroke to her triptych, the three panels merging into one cohesive image. "Together, but on our terms, not his. We're not children hoping for Daddy's approval. We're adults choosing whether to know our father." Their decision made, they scheduled one final group session with Dr. Cohen to prepare for the meeting that would change everything, or nothing, depending on what they found on the other side of their choice. As Seattle's spring rain painted the city in shades of renewal, three extraordinary teenagers stood on the cusp of adulthood, ready to write the next chapter of their story. Whatever they found when they opened the door to their father's world, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, stronger for being three, complete in themselves yet open to possibility. The decision was made, the preparations would begin, and somewhere in Seattle, a father who had once walked away without knowing what he left behind, waited to discover if three remarkable young adults would give him the chance he had never given them, the chance to be part of their story. Chapter 10. The Preparation. Spring in Seattle brought cherry blossoms and change. Melvin Chad's return to the city made headlines in the tech world, though few connected it to the approaching 18th birthday of three remarkable teenagers. He had purchased a house in Madison Park, close enough to his children's world to be accessible, far enough to respect their space. The house itself reflected his preparation. 4 bedrooms, each designed with someone specific in mind. Alexander's potential room included a state-of-the-art coding setup that mirrored his preferences, gathered from years of carefully studying his son's public work. Benjamin's space featured a wall of his swimming achievements, collected from news clippings and competition records. Charlotte's room centered around an art studio with the exact brands of supplies she preferred, details Melvin had gleaned from her gallery showings. The 4th bedroom, designed as a potential family room, held the physical manifestation of his decade-long vigil, carefully organized records of their lives. Photos, news articles, academic achievements, artistic accomplishments, sports victories, all meticulously catalogued and preserved. "Is this creepy?" he asked Marcus during an unexpected visit. Their old friendship, strained by Melvin's betrayal, had cautiously rekindled as Marcus recognized his genuine remorse. "It's complicated," Marcus answered, studying the wall of memories. "You've been the ghost in their lives for 18 years. Now you're trying to become real." Meanwhile, the triplets approached their decision with characteristic thoroughness. Alexander created a database of every public record of their father's activities since leaving Seattle, analyzing patterns and possible motivations. His company's charitable giving changed dramatically after he saw us at Pike Place. He reported during one sibling council, "The Phoenix Foundation wasn't just supporting our initiatives, it was reshaping his entire corporate culture." Benjamin channeled his preparation into intensive training, pushing his body to new limits, as if physical excellence could armor him against emotional vulnerability. "I want to meet him at my strongest," he explained between laps. "Not as the child he left, but as the man I've become, despite him." Charlotte processed through her art, creating a series of interconnected installations throughout their penthouse. Each piece explored aspects of their impending decision: hope, fear, anger, curiosity, potential healing, possible disappointment. In Dr. Cohen's office, the final preparations took shape through targeted therapy sessions. "Let's establish your boundaries," she suggested during a group session 2 weeks before their birthday. "What are your non-negotiables for this meeting?" Alexander's list was precise. No attempt to insert himself into Chadtek's operations, no criticism of Mom's parenting choices, no expectations of immediate emotional connection. Benjamin's boundaries were physical. No hugging, no pretending we're a happy family, no assumptions about future relationships. Charlotte's artistic sensitivity cut to the heart. No rewriting history, no excuses, no pressure to forgive. Edie's watched their preparation with a complex mixture of emotions, supported by her own therapy sessions with Dr. Cohen. "I've protected them for so long," she confided. "Teaching them to protect themselves from him feels like admitting he still has power to hurt them." The logistics of the potential meeting became its own form of therapy. They chose the Four Seasons private dining room, neutral territory with both privacy and security. James Patterson's office drafted detailed protocols. Length of meeting, topics allowed for discussion, security arrangements, exit strategies if things became too intense. Melvin, when presented with these terms through his lawyers, accepted without negotiation. His only request, handled through Marcus, permission to have 3 small gifts delivered before the meeting. After careful consideration, Daisy agreed. The gifts arrived 1 week before their birthday. For Alexander, a quantum encryption key developed by Melvin during Chadtek's early days, with original coding notes that revealed thinking patterns startlingly similar to his son's. For Benjamin, a vintage Olympic swimming medal won by his paternal grandfather, explaining an athletic legacy he'd never known about. For Charlotte, a collection of her paternal grandmother's art, delicate Chinese watercolors that echoed some of her own artistic techniques. Each gift came with a letter, carefully worded to acknowledge the past without demanding a future. "Dear Alexander, this key represented my finest work at Chadtek, but your innovations have already surpassed it. Your mind works in ways that both remind me of myself and show me what I could have been if I'd chosen a different path. Whether or not you choose to meet me, please know that your achievements are your own, earned through your brilliance and hard work, not through any genetic legacy from me. Dear Benjamin, your grandfather, whom you've never met because of my choices, was an Olympic alternate in 1964. He gave me this medal to remind me that second chances matter. Your athletic achievements have already eclipsed his, and mine were non-existent. You've built your own legacy. If you choose to meet me, know that I claim no part of your success. I only wish to express my admiration for it. Dear Charlotte, your grandmother painted these during the Cultural Revolution, finding beauty in darkness. Your art shows similar power, the ability to transform complex emotions into universal truth. I've followed your exhibitions from afar, seeing in your work the depth I never achieved in my life. If you decide to meet me, please know that I expect nothing. Your art, like your heart, belongs to you alone." The siblings sat in their shared space, examining these pieces of their paternal heritage. Alexander traced the encryption patterns with familiar movements. Benjamin held the medal, feeling its weight of history. Charlotte studied the watercolors, recognizing technical elements she'd developed independently. "He's done his homework," Alexander noted, analyzing the gift's psychological implications. "These aren't random choices or emotional manipulation attempts. They're carefully selected acknowledgements of who we are individually." Benjamin turned the medal over in his hands. "It doesn't change anything. Understanding us doesn't excuse abandoning us." Charlotte, photographing the watercolors for her ongoing installation, added softly, "No, but it suggests he's actually prepared to meet us as we are, not as he imagined we might be." Their preparation continued with increasing intensity as the birthday approached. Each sibling chose their armor carefully. Alexander in a perfectly tailored suit that echoed his coding precision. Benjamin in casual athletic wear that allowed freedom of movement. Charlotte in an artistic ensemble that functioned as both expression and shield. Adaizi helped them prepare while processing her own emotions about the meeting. "Remember," she told them, "you're not walking into his story. He's asking permission to enter yours." The day before their birthday, they held their final therapy session with Dr. Cohen. The office felt different somehow, charged with the energy of imminent change. "Tomorrow, you become legal adults," she noted. "You also gain the right to make this choice. How are you feeling about the timing of these two transitions?" Alexander spoke first, his analytical mind finding patterns. "It's mathematically elegant. 18 years since he left, deciding at 18 whether to let him return. The symmetry feels significant." Benjamin's response came through movement, his athletic grace containing nervous energy. "I feel ready. Whatever happens tomorrow, we've trained for this moment our whole lives, emotionally, if not physically." Charlotte completed their trinity of perspectives. "I've been sketching different versions of tomorrow for weeks, every possible outcome, but the real picture will be something we create together, in the moment." That night, their last night as children in the legal sense, the siblings gathered on their balcony. Seattle's lights sparkled below them. The same view that had witnessed their father's departure 18 years ago now, witnessing their preparation for his potential return. Alexander had his laptop, running final analyses on their father's recent activities. Benjamin was doing his evening stretches, physical movement grounding him in the present. Charlotte sketched the scene, capturing this moment of anticipation and threshold. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Alexander said, closing his laptop, "we face it together." Benjamin paused mid-stretch. "Like everything else in our lives." Charlotte added the final touches to her sketch. 3 hearts beating as one. The night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Stars hidden behind Seattle's typical cloud cover, but present nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring decisions, confrontations, possibly new beginnings or final endings. But tonight was for them alone. 3 siblings on the edge of adulthood, preparing to face their past while stepping into their future. Across the city, in his Madison Park house, Melvin Chad stayed awake as well, studying his children's lives through the documentation he'd gathered, hoping he'd prepared enough, knowing no preparation could really be sufficient for meeting the 3 miracles he'd left behind. Chapter 11. The First Meeting. The Four Seasons presidential suite had been transformed into neutral territory, its luxury providing a backdrop for what would become one of the most emotionally charged meetings in Seattle's social history. The private dining room, with its panoramic views of Elliott Bay, stood ready at 2 p.m. on the triplets' 18th birthday. Melvin arrived first, as stipulated in the carefully negotiated protocols. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his tie, the same shade of blue as the Chadtech logo he'd once helped design. Marcus, acting as intermediary, conducted a final review of the agreed-upon boundaries. "Remember," Marcus cautioned, "they're not here for explanations or apologies. This is their space to ask questions, express feelings, or maintain silence. Your role is to receive whatever they choose to give." The siblings arrived exactly on schedule, their entrance choreographed with the precision that had marked their entire lives. Alexander entered first, his coding-perfect posture a shield of professionalism. Benjamin followed, his athlete's grace containing barely suppressed energy. Charlotte completed their trinity, her artist's eyes already capturing details for future processing. Time seemed to stop as father and children faced each other for the first time with full awareness of their connection. The moment stretched, heavy with 18 years of absence and anticipation. Alexander broke the silence, his voice carrying the neutrality he used when debugging complex code. "You look older than your corporate headshots." It wasn't what Melvin had expected, but it offered familiar ground. Technology usually flatters, reality is less forgiving. Benjamin's response carried an athlete's direct challenge. Reality has been less forgiving for some of us than others. Charlotte said nothing, but her pencil moved across her sketchbook, capturing the tension in the room with quick, precise strokes. They took their seats at the round table, another carefully negotiated detail, ensuring no power dynamics through seating arrangements. Dr. Cohen sat slightly apart, present but unobtrusive, ready to moderate if needed. "I've followed your achievements," Melvin began carefully. "The quantum encryption breakthrough, the Olympic trials qualification, the Foster Gallery installation. Our achievements aren't your achievements," Benjamin cut in, his competitive spirit flaring. "You don't get to claim pride in results you didn't help create." Alexander's fingers tapped coding rhythms on the table. "Though your anonymous support through the Phoenix Foundation suggests you've attempted to contribute from a distance." Melvin's surprise at Alexander's knowledge showed briefly before his business mask returned. "You traced the Foundation's connections?" 7 shell companies, 3 international banks, complex routing through Singapore and Cayman Islands, Alexander confirmed. "Elegant structure, similar to how you extracted assets 18 years ago, but redirected towards social benefit instead of personal gain." The technical discussion felt safer than emotional territory, but Charlotte's artistic sensitivity cut through the deflection. "Why did you really come to Pike Place that day, the day you first saw us?" The question silenced the room. Melvin's carefully prepared responses faltered in the face of such direct inquiry. "I was hiding from preparations for a tech conference," he admitted. "Seeking familiar ground. I didn't know, couldn't have imagined, that your past would be sampling chocolates and doing homework." Benjamin's tone carried years of compressed anger. "That what you walked away from had multiplied by 3. Charlotte's pencil stilled. "Did you recognize yourself in us immediately?" "Yes." Melvin's voice cracked. Alexander's focus, Benjamin's determination, your artistic perception, it was like seeing echoes of myself and your mother, but perfected, enhanced, evolved into something far beyond what either of us could have been alone. Alexander's analytical mind sought patterns. Your company's charitable giving changed dramatically after that day. Increased focus on education, technology access, arts funding. Was that conscience or compensation? "Both," Melvin admitted. "Seeing you, it shattered everything I thought I'd built. Made me realize success without purpose is just organized greed." Benjamin stood abruptly, his athletic training demanding movement to process emotion. He paced to the window, Seattle's skyline providing perspective. "Did you ever regret leaving? Not just after seeing us, before that? When it was just Mom you'd abandoned?" The question carried weight beyond its words. Melvin's response would tell them something crucial about his capacity for human connection, not just paternal feeling. "Yes," he said quietly. "Singapore's success felt hollow within months. Victoria." He paused, noting their reactions to their father's former partner's name. "She recognized it before I would admit it. That's partly why our marriage failed. She said I was still in love with the man I'd been in Seattle, not the man I'd become in Singapore." Charlotte's sketch captured the moment, 3 teenagers carrying adult pain, 1 adult carrying teenage regret. "Did you try to find us? Before Pike Place?" "No." Melvin's honesty was absolute. "I convinced myself your mother was better off without me, that my absence was a gift rather than a wound. It was cowardice dressed as consideration." Alexander's coding mindset sought logical progression. "What changed after you saw us?" Everything. Melvin gestured to include the room, the city beyond, his entire life's trajectory. Seeing you three, it was like having every calculation I'd ever made proven wrong in an instant. Every measure of success I'd used suddenly seemed meaningless. Benjamin turned from the window, his competitive nature seeking victory. So we ruined your perfect escape. Good. No, Melvin corrected quietly. You saved me from it. Showed me what real achievement looks like. It's not market share or profit margins. It's three extraordinary young people who've become something remarkable despite their father's worst mistakes. Charlotte's artistic sensitivity detected nuance. You're not trying to excuse your choices. There are no excuses, Melvin acknowledged. Only consequences. I'm here to acknowledge them, not escape them. The conversation continued, moving through territories of science, sport, art, safe subjects that allowed them to observe each other without immediate emotional vulnerability. Alexander discussed coding philosophies, testing his father's technical knowledge while protecting his feelings. Benjamin challenged Melvin's understanding of competitive drive, measuring responses against his own standards. Charlotte's sketches captured the subtle shifts in dynamic, creating a visual record of their gradual navigation toward understanding, if not acceptance. As afternoon light shifted toward evening, Dr. Cohen gently reminded them of their agreed-upon time limit. The first meeting had been scheduled for 3 hours, long enough for initial connection, short enough to prevent emotional exhaustion. We've prepared folders, Alexander announced, his organization showing even in emotional moments. Questions we want answered about medical history, family background, potential genetic predispositions. Melvin accepted the folders with visible emotion. I'll answer everything. Take whatever time you need to review the responses. Benjamin's athletic discipline asserted itself. This doesn't make us a family. We're gathering information, not creating connection. I understand, Melvin said softly. You've grown into extraordinary adults without my input. Any role in your lives would be a privilege I haven't earned, not a right I can claim. Charlotte finished her final sketch, the lines capturing something subtle shifting in the room's energy. We'll need time to process this meeting, to discuss next steps among ourselves. As they prepared to leave, Melvin remained seated, respecting their space. But he spoke once more. Thank you. Not for forgiving, I don't expect that, but for allowing me to see the remarkable people you've become. Your mother did an extraordinary job. The siblings exchanged glances, their Trinity communication requiring no words. Alexander spoke for them. Yes, she did. That's one truth we all agree on. They left as they had arrived, together, their unity, their strength. The Four Seasons staff, discreet as always, pretended not to notice the emotional weight carried by these young people walking through their lobby, or the man who remained in the presidential suite, surrounded by the aftermath of a meeting 18 years in the making. Later that night, in their penthouse home, the siblings processed in their characteristic ways. Alexander coded a program to analyze the meeting's conversational patterns. Benjamin swam endless laps in their private pool. Charlotte transformed her sketches into a larger piece, capturing the day's emotional architecture. They had met their father. The myth had become a man, flawed, regretful, but genuinely changed by the discovery of their existence. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't family, wasn't closure. But it was something, a beginning of understanding, if not acceptance, a possible prologue to a new chapter, if not a revision of the past. The Seattle night wrapped around their building, stars hidden but present, much like the connections being tentatively explored between three extraordinary teenagers and the father who had finally faced the magnitude of what he had walked away from 18 years ago. Chapter 12. The Final Reunion. 1 year had passed since the first meeting at the Four Seasons. Seattle's tech scene buzzed with anticipation as Alexander Chad Herbert prepared to launch his quantum encryption startup, Quantum Shield. The company, built from his groundbreaking algorithm, promised to revolutionize digital security. The launch event was set for ChadTech's main auditorium, a deliberate choice that acknowledged both his heritage and his independence. At 19, Alexander had already proven himself beyond his famous parentage, his innovations earning respect from Silicon Valley's most demanding critics. Backstage, an hour before the presentation, the family dynamics that had evolved over the past year played out in characteristic ways. Benjamin, fresh from Olympic trials where he'd qualified for the swimming team, helped Alexander adjust his presentation tie with an athlete's precision. Charlotte, whose latest installation, Fragments and Holes, was earning international acclaim, made final adjustments to the stage's visual elements. Adaize watched her children with quiet pride. The past year had brought changes none of them could have predicted. After that first careful meeting, boundaries had slowly shifted. Weekly emails became occasional coffee meetings. Professional discussions evolved into cautious personal conversations. The wall between past and present hadn't crumbled, but doors had been carefully installed. "The quantum stabilization metrics look solid," Melvin offered, reviewing Alexander's presentation notes. Their shared technical brilliance had provided the first bridge between them. Coding spoke a language that emotions sometimes couldn't. "Mom already checked them," Alexander replied, but without the edge that would have been present a year ago. "But thanks." The words carried the weight of progress made, distance still maintained, possibility still open. Benjamin, who had struggled most with their father's return, managed a nod in Melvin's direction. His anger had gradually transformed into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Regular discussions about their grandfather's Olympic history had opened unexpected channels of connection. Charlotte captured the moment in quick sketches, her artist's eye noting how they had unconsciously arranged themselves. Adaize at the center, the triplets in their usual triangle formation, Melvin at a respectful distance, but undeniably part of the scene. Her latest exhibition, Reconciliation in Progress, explored these evolving dynamics through multimedia installations. The auditorium filled quickly. Seattle's tech elite mingled with international investors, all eager to witness the launch of what many predicted would be the next billion-dollar startup. But in the front row, family dynamics played out beneath the professional veneer. Adaize sat center, elegant in her CEO attire, her success still the foundation of their world. Beside her, Melvin occupied a carefully negotiated space, present but not presuming, supportive but not controlling. Their interaction had evolved into a complex dance of co-parenting adults who had found ways to acknowledge the past while navigating the present. Benjamin and Charlotte flanked their mother, their presence projecting the unity that had carried them through 19 years. Aunt Zara, Uncle Marcus, Dr. Cohen, and other key figures in their journey filled the surrounding seats, creating a physical representation of the support system that had shaped 3 remarkable young lives. When Alexander took the stage, his presence commanded attention. Quantum Shield began as a solution to a specific problem, he started, his confidence evident. But like many innovations, it evolved into something more fundamental, a way to protect what matters most. The technical presentation that followed demonstrated his brilliant mind, but it was the personal touches that captured the audience. He acknowledged his mother's leadership at ChadTech as his first example of technical excellence. He referenced Benjamin's competitive drive and Charlotte's artistic vision as inspirations for different aspects of his security protocol. Then came the moment that demonstrated how far they'd come. The original quantum encryption protocol that inspired this work, Alexander said, his voice steady, was developed by Melvin Chad in ChadTech's early days. Today's launch represents not just an evolution of that technology, but of our understanding that security isn't just about keeping things out, it's about choosing what to let in. Melvin, who hadn't known this acknowledgement was coming, felt tears threatening. In the audience, Adaze reached out and briefly squeezed his hand, a gesture of shared pride that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The launch was an unqualified success. Quantum Shield's demonstration exceeded expectations, and the contracts signed that day would ensure its place in tech history. But it was the private celebration afterward that marked how far they'd all come. In the penthouse where the triplets had grown up, family and close friends gathered to celebrate not just Alexander's success, but the journey that had brought them here. Benjamin's Olympic medals shared space with Charlotte's exhibition catalogues and Alexander's technical awards, 3 different paths to excellence. Melvin, still carefully respectful of boundaries, had brought a gift that demonstrated his growing understanding of his children. For Alexander, he'd recovered the original handwritten notes from ChadTech's first encryption protocol. For Benjamin, he'd arranged a private training session with his grandfather, the former Olympic swimmer. For Charlotte, he'd commissioned archival quality reproductions of her grandmother's entire art collection. "I've spent 19 years learning what I walked away from," he said quietly, presenting the gifts. "Each day shows me something new I missed, something extraordinary I failed to see. Thank you for allowing me to see it now." The siblings exchanged glances, their Trinity communication still strong, but now expanded to include new possibilities. Alexander spoke first, his analytical mind finding patterns in their progress. "The quantum theory of parallel universes suggests that somewhere, another version of us never had to navigate this complexity." Benjamin, his athletic philosophy showing through, but would that version be as strong, as united, as certain of who we are? Charlotte completed their perspective trinity. Every masterpiece needs both light and shadow. Our story has both. Adaze watched this exchange with complex emotions. Her children had grown into adults who could hold both the pain of abandonment and the possibility of reconciliation. They had learned to navigate relationships with both parents without diminishing either's role in their lives. The Seattle night wrapped around them, the same skyline that had witnessed their father's departure now witnessing a different kind of family gathering. Not the simple unity it might have been, but something more nuanced, a carefully constructed piece, a deliberately chosen connection. As evening deepened, the conversation flowed more easily than anyone might have predicted a year ago. Alexander discussed quantum computing theories with Melvin, while Charlotte sketched the scene and Benjamin shared Olympic training stories. Adaze moved among them, her grace and strength still the foundation of their world, but no longer its only support. "I never thought we'd be here," Melvin admitted quietly to Marcus during a private moment. "I don't deserve this chance." "It's not about deserving," Marcus replied. "It's about what they chose to build from what you left behind." The triplets had created their own ritual over the past year, monthly dinners where they processed their evolving family dynamic. Tonight, they slipped away to their favorite balcony spot, the city lights below them like earthbound stars. "Did you mean it?" Benjamin asked Alexander, "about his encryption protocol inspiring yours?" "Technically, yes," Alexander answered. "But the inspiration wasn't just technical. It was about understanding that sometimes the most complex security systems aren't about keeping people out. They're about protecting what's valuable while allowing for controlled access." Charlotte's pencil moved across her paper, capturing her brother's profiles against the night sky. "Like what we've built this year. Boundaries that protect without completely isolating." They had grown beyond their father's shadow, without pretending it didn't exist, had learned to accept his presence without requiring his approval, had built something new without demolishing their existing foundation. Inside, Melvin watched his children through the window, understanding that this moment was both more and less than he'd hoped for. More, because they had found ways to include him in their lives without compromising their unity. Less, because he would always be the father who missed their first steps, first words, first achievements. But as Alexander returned to share technical insights, as Benjamin offered cautious inclusion in his Olympic journey, as Charlotte showed him sketches that captured their evolving dynamic, Melvin understood that some gifts come wrapped in complexity. The night ended with a photograph, the first formal family picture to include both parents and all three children. They arranged themselves carefully. Adai's central, the triplets in their natural formation, Melvin at a respectful angle that acknowledged both his connection and its limitations. Charlotte would later create 3 different artistic interpretations of this moment. One in traditional oils capturing the physical reality, one in digital media exploring the emotional undercurrents, and one in mixed media representing the complex layers of their family's evolution. As guests departed, the family unit that had been broken 19 years ago stood together in its new configuration. Not healed completely, some fractures leave permanent marks, but strengthened at the broken places like gold-filled cracks in ancient pottery. Adais and Melvin shared a brief glance, acknowledging their joint creation of 3 extraordinary humans and the very different paths they'd taken in nurturing that legacy. The triplets, watching this exchange, recognized it for what it was. Not reconciliation between former spouses, but peace between co-parents who had found ways to support their children's present without denying their past. The final moments of the evening belonged to the siblings alone, as they had so many moments in their lives. On their balcony, under a Seattle sky now clear enough to show stars, they stood together as they always had. To quantum encryption, Alexander toasted with sparkling cider. To Olympic dreams, Benjamin added. To art that tells our story, Charlotte completed. Below them, Seattle's lights twinkled like the stars above, and somewhere in that glitter lay all the stories that had brought them here. A mother's strength, a father's regret, 3 children's journey from abandonment to understanding, and the complex peace they had all built together. The end was really another beginning, as all true stories are. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Alexander's company launch, Benjamin's Olympic training, Charlotte's next exhibition. But they would face these challenges as they had faced everything else. Together, stronger for being 3, complete in themselves, yet now capable of including others in their carefully guarded circle. As night deepened into morning, 3 hearts beat in their familiar rhythm, while 2 parents, one who had never left and one who had found his way back, watched over the miracle they had created together, though they had nurtured it apart. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real, complex, and rich with possibility, just like the family that had written it together. Subscribe if you liked.